Now, to turn to a more deliberate step-by-step summary of the book, we can look at this question of goodness that we saw clearly at the end of part 6 and see how it's developed in stages through each part of the book. Part 1, you will remember, says that current education is bad. It's no good. It doesn't teach you anything. Why is that? Well, it's meant for people better than human beings. It's meant for angels. So it tries to elevate you to a standard of goodness that isn't natural or normal for you. Part 2 expands on this. Your character is a mess, it says. You don't add up, you don't cohere, because you were pulled in two different directions before you were old enough to have reason to be a judge to impose one plan on you. One way where you were pulled was according to that too high education. That's what your teachers wanted for you. They wanted you to be a saint or a patriotic hero. And that means dying to yourself and living for others, denying any satisfaction or fulfillment in this life. Satisfaction is for the next life, according to this understanding of education. At the same time, you were pulled in an opposite direction by your desires, and it's the essence of desires, of course, to want satisfaction and to want it right now. And neither of these influences are reasonable, and as I said, you did not have reason to make a compromise. Now, this compromise is precisely what we saw in part 6. It's the two things that made you up that were impossible to reconcile. You couldn't be both a saint and fulfill your desires. Now, that problem is the one that's solved by the view of goodness and the understanding of charity that comes up in part 6. Through science and technology, you can satisfy yourself and do what's good for others. Now, part 3 says you're free to live your own life and make your own choices. In particular, you can choose your own happiness. It's part of the traditional education that you must aspire to the perfect happiness of heaven, which is the reward of saints and patriotic heroes, and that you will be miserable if you don't have and can't look forward to having that perfect happiness. But Descartes says we have the power to moderate our desires, to choose a more practical and realistic happiness for ourselves, and if we choose it firmly, we can let our regrets about not ever getting the perfect happiness, we can let them go. Now, in part 4, Descartes concentrates on his own imperfection. He's full of doubts. There are things that he wants to know that he badly needs to know that he does not know. So he has the reflection that human beings are bad, not in the sense that we're sinners and that we deliberately choose to do the wrong thing, but we're bad in that we're badly created with needs that we don't know how to fulfill. Now, the arguments in part 4 concentrate on himself and his soul, and then what he is, and God and God's existence, and what God is. Now, the argument about himself says that he must take authority for his own opinions. There's no way around it. He couldn't give that away if he wanted to. He must make his own decisions about what to believe. Now, the argument about what God is concerns different possibilities. It's easy to reject the thought that God is the God of the human imagination. But the two live possibilities are that God is perfect as the object of what Descartes wants in his imperfection. If he asks a question, then he's showing his faith that there must be an answer. And the sum of all answers, all truths, could be one way we think about God. So that would be the God of a single perfection, God as the truth itself. Now, the other way, the more traditional way, is to think that God is the summary of every kind of perfection. That whatever you think of as less than perfect, not good, that God would be the reverse of that, the complete perfection in every category. Now, Descartes makes an argument along these lines that says this perfect being must exist, but it seems that questions have to come to our mind. He doesn't articulate these doubts, but it's hard to imagine that active, thoughtful readers will miss asking these questions. How can it be that God has all the perfections? That is, that he's benevolent, he wants what's best for us in the highest way, and also that he's omnipotent and he has every power, he can do everything. So he wants what's best for us, he's able to do everything, but we are not created in the best way, we're created in a very poor way. How can all those parts go together? So if we use our logic in that way, and we remember that part 4 says we have to think for ourselves, but we cannot give away our authority over our own opinions, it seems that Descartes' God of the simpler perfection, God as the truth of science, the sum of all answers to all questions, is a more reasonable way to think about God, and the one that we therefore have to choose. Now, as you can see, the stakes in this argument are quite high, and I hope students feel that. I would rather have people reject Descartes as a blasphemer than simply to have students tolerate him by not taking his ideas very seriously. What we see in part 4 is that faith has changed, so religion has changed. Science becomes a new kind of worship. That's how we identify the God that our logic tells us is real and exists. We see from part 5 that science can point in two directions. The tradition is that all intellectual questions lead back to God, and the next step is that all intellectual questions end in mystery because, of course, we do not understand God. We aren't meant to believe that we can, and we shouldn't try. Descartes, on the other hand, rejects this view. The chief good of science is that it creates a feeling of awe when you feel small against the great universe, the great realities of the universe, and you're humbled and put in your place and maybe saved from doing terrible and evil things. Descartes rejects that. His science is based on a kind of pride when we realize that the low things we already understand can be the key to understanding the largest and highest things. That brings us back to part 6 and the new ideas of goodness and charity that I think we understand pretty well by now. To be a good person means to help others, and that means you have to know enough science to know how. And I think we can end with a dilemma, a decision, which I think is a very real decision. If your friend is sick and comes to you for help, what's the best way to respond? Is it to say, God is good and whatever happens will be for the best in the grand scheme of things? That is a very common reaction, and it's a serious and sober and thoughtful one, and maybe it's the only one we need because it's the one that keeps us from sin, and human sin is terribly destructive, and we may need this attitude to save us from the problems that sin causes. But that doesn't seem to be Descartes' answer. Descartes' answer is, here, take this pill, it will help you because matter doesn't know about what's good and doesn't care about what's good. Sin is not involved with matter. It simply obeys its rules and its forces, and this pill will force your disease out of your body and let you go healthy again. I don't want to settle that question for you, but I hope you can see that it's a real decision and that the stakes are quite high. The implications for what way you live your life after deciding what's the best approach to a decision like this, the implications for what you do after this decision are high. One doesn't match the other. It's a fork in the road that leads you to one direction or another, and the destinations are different.